Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Jeff Alberts back on the show. We're going to be talking about his current contest prep. Will he be competing head-to-head against Alberto Nunez? You'll find out today. And also we talk about kind of what his journey has been like in bodybuilding and some of the trends he's seen across social media and how he uses those to his advantage and how he stays focused on his own journey. Really, really great discussion here. And if you haven't yet, please do sign up to our newsletter. We've been putting out a lot of good information across this, if I don't say so myself. And if you want to get part of that good information and learn and maybe pick something up that's going to help you along your bodybuilding journey or your own physique progress, then definitely sign up to that newsletter. It's going to be in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into the chat. Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Jeff Alberts back on the show. I don't know if you probably don't know this, Jeff, but you've been on 5 times. I don't know if that comes as a surprise that you feel like you've been on that many times, but it's been going a while, and I've known Jeff for before the podcast started, so I'm honored to have you on for the 5th time.
Oh, likewise. Yeah, we go way back, Steve.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to kind of see how both of us have kind of evolved over the years. So, and it's always a pleasure talking with you. So yeah, it should be a good, fun chat.
Sure. And yeah, the last one, probably pertinent for some people listening because, it's kind of early in the season. We're just talking off air about how kind of Jeff's busy with lots of his competitors coming up because this is shows start kind of in May and then they just really ramp up now. So the last one we did was episode 288. If people want to look back to the recovery diet, something that maybe even some competitors want to start looking at now just to kind of prepare themselves. I just had a client kind of compete a couple of weekends ago and he's just going through that phase and it's his first time and it's always just you can know it all, but it's so much better if you're prepared to know that it's going to be a challenge and there's so many things to go through. So yeah, I'm glad we did that episode. But today, that's not what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to dig into something a bit different. But the first thing I wanted to dig into, Jeff, if you're happy to, is to talk about your current contest prep. So for people who don't know, not only is Jeff really busy with his own clients, he's also in a contest prep himself. And am I right in thinking you have a warm-up show in August or you're doing guest posing in August and then your actual shows in and around September, November, you kind of have left this open-ended prep is something that you like to do?
Yeah, I committed to a guest posing on August 20th. So it gives me 8 or 9 weeks or so to kind of get ready for that. I don't think I'm going to be 100% for that, but it's a good opportunity to kind of dial in and actually commit 100% because as you know, see, I've been doing this for a long time. So I don't really think my contest prep as contest prep. I think it more okay, it's a lifestyle change. Okay, now I got to actually eat less and move more. So that's basically the gist of it. And sometimes I've been doing this for so long, you just, the motivation, of course it comes and goes with most people, but the commitment even gets kind of questioned, when you're this deep into a career. So it took me a while to kind of get to a point where I was fully committed. And it was just the fact that I got asked to do a guest posing. So kind of blessing in disguise. I kind of thought about it for a day. I'm can I get back to you on that? And the next day I was just do it. So committed. So it's game on now. So I'll probably be maybe 80% for that, 85. And you're correct that, September through November is, I think, going to be more or less the sweet spot for me, based on past history and where I'm at right now with trajectory. So we'll kind of see what shows I select, but I want to do worlds just to say, hey, I just turned 51. So, hey, here's this 51-year-old dude who's still trying to stay on a high level. So that's kind of more or less the big test for me.
Because that will be you'll just be in the open, I guess. Will you be a middleweight? Was that generally where you?
Yeah, usually where I fall. Yeah. And usually it's always middleweights is always kind of one of the tougher classes.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a lighter middleweight. So, I think it was in 2014. I'm I might be able to squeak into the lightweight, but it just wasn't going to happen. So I was actually the low end of the middleweight. And then of course, I get pushed in there with Siobhan Cunningham and, Cleveland Thomas and, Levi Burge. It's the elite of the elite, So it was fun though, because it's a benchmark, right? So yeah, it's a good way to gauge progress, right? It's okay, where do I stack up against some of the best out there? And so a lot of unknown territory heading into it, but I got answers. Then it kind of helped to forge the path moving ahead. So yeah, so we'll see what this one brings. My thought processes and perspectives around the goals have shifted, and that's kind of happened over the course of my career. So, I'm no longer like thinking like, hey, I'm going in there to kick some ass and place top 3. It's more like, hey, if I can get there and keep doing this and have fun with it, especially at, the age I'm at now and the 35 years I've been doing this, I mean, that right there is probably a good victory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that kind of the description of the fact that not much is changing. You're just kind of doing more activity and you're eating less. And I think that's, what's that? Like it's a reel or something. Maturing, what's it called? Like maturing in the gym is realizing something, or maturing I would say maturing as a bodybuilder is like kind of realizing how it's a lifestyle, and how if you're cutting, kind of massing, or if you're in prep, that there's only small changes really, versus like, because it has to complement your life, which I think you've done an excellent job of showing people across social media, and how it's a priority for you, but it's not like everything else in your life is just completely irrelevant and it's kind of the blinkers are on and it's only bodybuilding.
Yeah, I think, maybe you can attest to this too. It's like the longer you're in this, your perspective shifts. So sometimes like in the moment, I try to take myself back a step or two and think from different perspectives. Because I'm sure like when I'm on stage, I'm going to be like, okay, I want to try to place well, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there's different perspectives to look at it. And that's what I've kind of learned the older I've gotten, is like, okay, just slow down a little bit and try to look it through different lenses, because nothing is ever black or white. Like you can always find the shades of gray in anything that you're kind of doing. So that's what I try to do with myself. So what I try to do with athletes is just to kind of have them look for other ways, other perspectives to look through.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you competed, was it 2019 was your last season? So how are you feeling? Obviously, there's still plenty of time for you to diet down and get into shape. How are you feeling in terms of your physique? Do you feel like you're past, I don't want to say, I suppose you never want to think this, but do you think you're past your kind of prime, or do you feel like you're still coming into a physique this season that could be your all-time best? The potential is still there to be had.
So here's the thing, is what's the perspective we're looking at? What are we comparing things to? If we're comparing like where I feel like my all-time best was, it's 2014. So was 2019 better than 2014 as far as the physique? Probably not. Maybe a little bit under, but not that much. But then if you take another step, take a step back and go, okay, in 2014, I was 43 years old. In 2019, I was 48 years old. From that perspective, it's like, I did pretty good. I would say I was 95% of 2014. Placing wise, you can win a show and you could be 100%. You can win a show at 80%. And deep down, you kind of know more or less where your best is. So that's another layer to look at. Another layer to look at too would be like, okay, if we're comparing my physique in 2019 against other people, maybe some other people beat me, like Sam Okonola beat me, right? But the question is, his physique's better than mine, right? So, visually, if you see it first glance, you're like, okay, yeah, no doubt, Sam's better than Jeff. But then the question becomes like, well, did Sam truly reach his full potential? And did Jeff truly reach his full potential? So let's just say Sam didn't, but I did. Maybe I'm the better bodybuilder from that perspective, but the judges don't see that. No one sees that, or vice versa. Maybe he reached full potential and I didn't. So there's all kinds of layers and lenses that kind of look through to, find what you're kind of looking for as far as how you kind of define success and those types of things. So I've learned over the years how to kind of balance those things out in order to keep myself moving forward. Because could you imagine like in 2019, like, oh yeah, I didn't look better than 2014. Why am I still doing this? I'm 48. I'm not going to get any better because I'm getting older. So, that's not a good mindset to have. So it's like, okay, let's just keep moving forward and try, because that's what I continue to try to do, is like when I go into the gym, there's still intention to improve. So like right now, when I assess it, one, this house sucks as far as lighting, so I can't really get a good gauge. But, I have my moments where I'm like, I just don't know. It's like, I think there's like 2 or 3 times this prep, I'm already like, man, maybe I might pull the plug on this. And it's always those moments where, maybe you're eating a little less, you're digging, you're grinding, you're a little tired. So your mindset tends to shift towards negativity, pessimism. than it does like, oh, I feel great. I feel
Yeah.
confident. So a couple of refeeds later and you're like, oh, yeah, I look good. I think I can do this. So I've learned not to get too tied up in those types of emotions, just basically just continue to forge ahead. And I know like the answers are there in the end.
Yeah.
Go through it. The answers are, it's always 2020 when you look in hindsight. So do I think I'm better than I was in 2019 or 2014? I don't know. I'm a realist. I would like to think that I'm probably not going to be, but I also know that in the moment, I'm trying to fulfill current potential. And I think that's like with anything, like I'm sure you do this with your athletes, first conversations, you're talking about expectations, what's realistic, so that way, like you're not setting yourself up for like a downer or things like that. So I kind of I know realistically that I'm probably not going to be like 2014, but I'm okay with it because, when you've trained for 35, 36 years, you've competed since the early 90s, when you're now in your fifth decade of life, if you're able to get to a world stage and still be fairly competitive, I kind of see that as a victory. So it keeps me moving ahead. And I'm enjoying what I'm doing, so otherwise I wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. That's the key thing, isn't it? Enjoying it. And I love that you actually brought it out and like took the different perspectives and lenses, because you're right that with clients, like, I don't know, you probably get it all the time. And I certainly do, where people will be like, oh, I only want to compete if I can like have a chance of, I don't know, going pro or placing in the top 3, blah, blah, blah. And I understand the perspective of not wanting to look kind of out of place on stage. But at the end of the day, you can't control any of that. Like there could be 6 people who turn up and the other 5 are just like, they're all going to go pro like at some stage or whatever. They could be just the top of the top. You have no control over that. And just like you have no control really. And if you're going to beat the previous Jeffs, you just have to do your best efforts right now. And the result will be the result. So I love that perspective. And I don't know, you would probably know much better than me, Jeff. Has anyone actually done what you're doing now in terms of you are over 50 and you're going to be hopefully at Worlds? I guess you have to qualify for that. Has anyone done that in like natural bodybuilding, or will you be kind of like, I assume also not many people have done it if they have?
Oh, no, I'm not the first one. That's for sure. I mean, you look at Marshall Johnson. He just did a show at 62.
Oh my gosh.
He probably doesn't look that old. While, right? and then Alberto and Eric Holland sent a picture through. I'm like, whoa, it's Marshall Johnson. I think it was a smaller pro show. He won. And he looked good. And Alberto's like, he's not done yet. Like, so there's more season. He's like, guarantee he's going to come in just peeled. So for me, when I was in my early 40s coming up, that was kind of my inspiration, was Marshall Johnson, because here's this guy, he's like 9 or 10 years older than me. And I'm like, okay, wow, this guy's in his early 50s and he's still like, at the time, like one of the elite natural bodybuilders in the world. I'm like, okay, if he can do it, why can't I do it? And now here I am, his age back, as far as in my early 50s. So I'm like, okay, I can still do this. He did, I can do it. But now I see, like, I was thinking like, man, I might be done this season, next season, call it a day. But seeing that, I'm like, well, well, damn it, maybe I can keep doing this. So I think, you look at guys that have done it before us, and it's like, you don't see, I think people kind of look at me as an inspiration because I'm someone who's out there in the public eye sharing. Trust me, there's a lot of guys my age and older that are kicking ass. They're just not on social media sharing everything. They're out there.
Yeah, I think it's appreciated that you do. I think 3DMJ were some of the first kind of top natural bodybuilders as a whole, like just sharing like details and thoughts and programming and kind of educational things that just weren't being shared before. It was all kind of a little bit mystified with the like, especially like the pro natural bodybuilders. I think it still is to some extent, where it's just their prerogative isn't to share it all. And I can completely understand that, because once you, and I'm sure you do as well, Jeff, the times you probably get frustrated with social media, you're just like, why do I put myself out there? Because sometimes you get that one negative comment or a little bit of kickback and it can be frustrating. But I think and I would say definitely from my perspective and the listeners, like, it's so valuable that you have been sharing so much.
I enjoy doing it because I've been that person who's trying to look for some answers, or, hey, how do these guys do it? And I think that's why a lot of people can relate to me, because the way I present myself online is exactly what I do offline. I just go about my day to day, and there's nothing exciting about it. You know, get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, go for my 10,000 step walk. There's nothing exciting about that. There's nothing exciting about going in and doing a few sets, you know, with 100% ability, and then just carrying on with the rest of my day. And I think for social media, I mean, yeah, I think in the early stages when I first started going on there, it's like you're putting yourself out there. Now you're going to get judged, whether it's good or bad. And of course, you can get 100 likes. Cool. You get that one. It's like, man, that's the one that kind of hits, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody has a little bit of insecurity. It's like, I want people to like me just like, you know, anybody else. So it's like, well, what am I doing? That's one person just like being that way, you know? So, but I've had to learn to not get caught up in that. And I think that's the thing with social media. It's changing, it's evolving. So it's either, do I choose to be stuck in 2010 and go about my ways that way, or do I just accept and embrace the fact that social media is changing? Doesn't mean I have to do exactly everything the way it's going right now, but I can pick my spots to put myself out there where it feels very comfortable to me. And the way I look at it is, if I go from 2,000 likes, now I'm only down to 500 because social media changes. But I'm getting, you know, a little bit of engagement, you know, and people are benefiting, whether it's one person or 1,000 or what have you. You're putting something positive out there. So it's the way I choose to kind of look at it. And the days where I just feel like social media irritates me, I don't go on it.
Yeah.
It's as easy as that. And I'm happy,
Yeah.
you know, I'm good. I'll come back the next day, or sometimes I go away from like maybe 4, 5, 6 days or whatever. And I just come back when I feel like I'm ready to do so. So sometimes it just takes a lot of energy to put yourself out there. And sometimes you need a breather, like a deload, right? You just need to kind of take a deload, and, you know, it's just helps me out that way. I think of me first. I have to be selfish in a good way, right? Take care of myself first before I can take care of other people.
Yeah. It shouldn't surprise me that you have such a mature approach to it all, because that is a very mature approach, and that's a great way to look at it, actually. I think especially for probably we've got a lot of younger listeners and they're coming up through social media. And I even got someone messaged me the other day. I can't remember. It was something along the lines of like, how do you grow your business without being like selling yourself out and things like this? Because that's how people now view social media. And you just describe it perfectly there, where you just do what you're comfortable with. You don't try and like stay up with the trends or what have you. Because it just doesn't serve you, and you can keep your engagement with the number of loyal followers that you have there.
I mean, there's a reason I think 3D Muscle Journey is still in existence 12 years later, and you guys are doing really well as well. Is because we take care of the athlete first. It's like, if you do a good job, they're going to tell the next person, yeah, these guys are pretty good. They care. And then it just kind of goes like that. So we really haven't had like those big marketing pushes, you know, and all this. We don't have any advertisements on our website or any of that stuff. So that's kind of just how we've kind of done business. And I think with anything you do, right? Like, you kind of start small, and over time you keep working consistent. It just kind of just organically grows.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting because I don't think there's been, at least when I was starting to get into bodybuilding, and certainly by the time I was competing, Instagram was real. It was a thing. Whereas you came through a time where it didn't exist. And I think Instagram is, when people think of social media, that's like the biggest one at the moment. I think TikTok, I'm too old for that. I'm not going TikTok. There's other people can entertain that platform. It's too much for me. But Instagram for me is like, when I think of social media, I think people think of that. You guys were big on YouTube actually before kind of Instagram was around. You're kind of building a platform there. Do you feel like Instagram's been a positive overall for like natural bodybuilding? Did you see a shift in like in the competitive scene and how it grew, the kind of quality of athlete or anything like that? How do you feel that impact's been?
I think I'm not the social media person of the team, that's for sure. But for me, the way I kind of look at it, like, we kind of knew Facebook was kind of dying out. So it's like, okay, here's Instagram, this next big thing. It's like, okay, if we don't, like I said earlier, it's like you can either kind of just get stuck in one place and get stuck in the times and kind of have pushback against something that's coming out that's new. It's how you get
TikTok.
lost. That's how you become right? It's how you become a dinosaur.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so we realized, okay, Instagram, I got to go on there. I remember doing the first post. I'm like, here I am, you know, and then you learn it and you kind of roll with it, like anything else. I think it's been like, there's pros and cons to everything in life. And I think overall for natural bodybuilding, I think it's just given it a lot more exposure. I mean, there's far more people participating in natural bodybuilding, whether it's bodybuilding, physique, classic, whatever. Like there's more people engaged and interested in participating. So from that perspective, it's definitely helped out. And there's a lot of people that I'm sure that have benefited from your guys' content on there, ours, other people's content. I could go back to the early 90s when I first started getting into this thing. And it's like, I didn't have any exposure to any information other than the magazines and a couple of local guys at the gym. And you go to the shows back then, you see the quality of athletes, and you're just like, okay, it's night and day now. Like, yeah, there's like, if you go back in time, you could just see just the way the physiques are. I think from a like size perspective, like, muscle is relatively the same as far as size, but the conditioning, the approaches to everything, just far superior than it is now.
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
So yeah, something I did want to talk to Jeff about was, obviously I think you mentioned you've been doing this for 36 years. If people don't know, you have been doing it for 36 years, which is, actually older than, I'm getting towards that age, but that's more time than I've even been on this planet, which is crazy to think about. And obviously you said you're now 51 and so that means you started when you were 15, which is actually funny because I pretty much started at 15 as well, but it's not funny. Probably a lot of people start around that sort of age. They start getting into things. But I'd be really interested to hear how your training has evolved. So when you first started getting into the gym, and maybe if there are any like aha moments, for example, I don't know, when Eric started coming out with more of his like the muscle and strength pyramids, he started formalizing kind of particular concepts and things. But yeah, I'd love to hear about kind of what it's looked like at the start, and if there was any experiments that you kind of got caught up in and they didn't work for you.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably talk like 10 hours on my whole training career.
Sure.
That's right. So I mean, starting out, yeah, it was more or less like in my bedroom with a plastic weight set, the cement filled plastic weights. And it wasn't for like, I want to get big and strong, look jacked and for girls or whatever, or even for sports. It was more so that the family dynamic at the time, my mom had kind of remarried, moved in with my stepdad. And of course, it was just like hard for a, 13, 14-year-old kid. So I actually started when I was 14. So it was kind of like an escape from reality, just every day after school and go in there and lift. So it composed of just, bench press, overhead tricep press, and a curl. Like that's all I would do because I didn't know any better. Like I didn't even have money for magazines or anything like that. So it was just like, that's all I did. And of course you get these little peanuts popping up. You're like, oh, there's a little bit of gains there, but still I wasn't like that serious into it. And then just naturally, as I got into high school, I was lifting in PE class, like every day. Like that was part of the curriculum for me. It was basically just training every day. And then I made some really nice gains, but I had no clue about like setting up programming. I didn't have any clue about diet or anything like that. It was just like, okay, I'm doing bench Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That was like the main thing. That was the ego thing. I want to see if I can get my bench up. And then from there, I would maybe do some rows and maybe a military press on the universal machine, some curls, that type of thing. So upper body development was like pretty stout as a 16, 17-year-old kid. I had hardly any back development because I wasn't training back properly. I had no legs because I didn't train legs. And it wasn't until I met a guy in Arizona. I was going to a gym there, and he was a Mike Mentzer, Dorian Yates follower. And that's how he trained. So that was my first aha moment. Not to say that HIIT was like, quote unquote, the holy grail of hypertrophy. But what it did is he taught me structure. He taught me about supply and demand as far as train hard, put the effort in, have intention with it, make sure you're recovering from that. So we would train basically 3 days a week, every other day with the weekends off. So with that much intensity, that much effort, having a lot of recovery, and then he emphasized you need to eat because I didn't put any emphasis on diet and nutrition. So you need to eat in surplus. So, okay, let's eat in surplus. I was eating like 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day, training hard, having a lot of recovery. Well, 3 months later, I went from like 165 to 190, 195, somewhere in there. And I'm like, holy shit, like I just found like the holy grail of bodybuilding. So it was a pros and cons, because the pro was I learned structure. I learned how to put muscle on. The negative was it basically made me, like, in a sense, blinded to other ways of doing things, because this happened to work so well in the moment that that's what I thought I needed to continue to do. So I got stuck in that for a very long time, and I didn't have any other outside influence. No one who was, like, let's say, considered a mentor for me. And, when you make that type of development, you have a lot of success, then you have the oohs and ahs from people around you. You think you know more than you really know. So it was, the ego got the best of me. And, another aha moment was, meeting Eric and Brad and Alberto, where they're like, hey, Jeff, here's some other tools that you can use. And of course, the walls are up, like, because your identity gets tagged to that belief. So you're like, oh, you feel like you're getting attacked. So you get defensive a little bit. So it took a while for me to kind of let those walls come down and, in a sense, mature as a person first. That allowed me to make more progress thereafter.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like a typical Dunning-Kruger effect almost that people go through, where they like learn like very small amounts that provide probably the majority of results. Like you were training hard, you had structure, you had rest, you had recovery, and then you had a surplus, which is very important for muscle gain. So that's great. But obviously, I think a lot of people get to that position where they've made their kind of newbie gains, maybe some intermediate gains, and then they kind of are closed-minded to don't know anything else, and maybe they think, I remember I got there where I was like, anyone who's bigger than me at this point probably on gear, they probably are. They're probably on steroids. So it was like Matt August was someone who I looked up to, and I was like, man, I can't believe he looks that good, and I've been training similar time to him and things like this. And then you mature and you're open-minded, you learn more, and like you said, that's where the guys came in. So did they encourage you to, what was the kind of next stage for you? Was it using some relative intensity, or kind of having a change in training frequency or volumes?
Yeah, just in general, it was like, hey, let's maybe tone down some of that intensity. Let's add some more little more volume in, meaning set volume, not going as close to failure. So, in a sense, what that taught me was like, okay, I don't need to be like balls to the wall all the time. And, that actually helped with the recovery aspect. It's like, okay, I actually can recover better. And then the shift in programming, because up until that point, I wasn't really focused on trying to actually like squat as much as I can, deadlift as much as I can. It was just like kind of using relatively the same loads all the time, but just pushing the failure all the time. So it was more, I was more focused on just the intensity, the effort, versus like trying to actually get stronger and things like that. So that was a little bit of a shift. And then I started to dabble a little bit in the big three more, because at the time, like we're talking 2011, 2010, in that area, 2012. So 5-3-1 was kind of like a little popular back then. So I was like, let me try this. So that was when I basically took a squat and a deadlift, like PRs at, 42 years of age. So I really believe like that strength level that I obtained with, just the approaches that we're taking, making sure, of course, I was well fed. Like I was hitting these numbers, and the physique was kind of like proving that. It's like, oh wow, I actually have some glutes and hamstrings that are pretty gnarly now. They've always been pretty decent, but it's like, okay, it's like another level now. And the same thing with my back. I learned how to, train back. Like Eric's like, hey, instead of doing those bent rows, why don't you do rack rows? So reset each rep, take a lot of the burden off the lower back, take it off the legs. So recovery was better coming off of that. Plus, the quality of those reps were just far superior. So I'm actually targeting the back a lot better. So over time, like all these little tools I started implementing, start seeing some shifts in my physique. And it's not that like from the time I met them, like I still had attained probably all the muscle mass I had attained up to that point. It's not like I accrued a bunch after that. But with the approaches to dieting, contest prep, like learning how to take refeeds, learning how to take diet breaks, in a sense, just pacing out the rate of loss. That's in general, that's basically what we're doing.
Okay.
slowing down the rate of loss so I wasn't chewing through lean tissue. So I was retaining a lot more muscle mass. So it's just a combination of all these things. It was putting together a better package. And the maturity too, it's like they taught me more than just about how to physically change my body. Like more the mental and emotional stuff was probably where I grew the most. And that allowed me to actually implement some of these tools and things like that to become a better bodybuilder. And then later in life, become a better husband, father, and balance out, the bodybuilding world with that, because it was always kind of a struggle up until that point.
Yeah, I guess it's like we talked about at the start there, how bodybuilding's like a lifestyle for you. So that the changes to what you're doing is not a huge drastic change like from where it was previous. And so a lot of the tools that they provided to you were like ways of managing that element for you. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but you, in terms of like injuries and things, you haven't had any like major setbacks in that regard either.
Just one major injury, and that was in 2013. I tore my calf. So that's humbling, right? So the reason that happened was, and I can remember this day vividly because you never forget like the feeling of someone taking a pair of scissors and cutting through your calf muscle. Yeah, it's like, so that it was a lower body day. So I went into it, felt a little tired. I'm like, let's just get in there and see what we could do. So I started with squats, fell off. I'm like, I just don't have no pop here. And my ego just said, keep pushing. And, my NSEEK was telling me I'd fell off, but I didn't listen. So I was like, okay, let me go to the next exercise. Same thing, just kind of fell off. Got to the calf raises and tried to do the same amount of loading that I always do, which was over 500 pounds on a Smith machine, which is a lot of weight for calves. And it fell off. I'm like, man, that's like, okay, let me strip down. So I stripped like 50 pounds off it for the second set. Third or fourth rep in, it just gave out. So I learned like, okay, listen to my body. Like whenever I feel like I'm off like that, just either like really tone things down or just, hey, let's just go home and rest and come back the next day. So it was a humbling experience. I mean, it was hard to go through an injury like that because, mentally it's definitely challenging, but it did teach me a lot about how to like listen to my body, how to work around injuries, how to work through them both physically and mentally. And that's definitely helped me to help other people that I coach that kind of goes through these things. So I remember being on the couch like that night, just like I was in a dump, man. It was like just a downer. And I was texting Alberto back and forth. And he's like, stay positive, that type of thing. And I'm like, yeah, he's probably right. Let's instead of like, just sitting here sulking, let's flip the switch here and go, okay, how can I learn from this and help other people through it?
Yeah. I think ultimately that's the only way to be. Like it's fine short term to like, we're all going to be emotionally like tied to that. I had it literally recently where I just did something stupid, like in the kitchen. I like knocked my shoulder and I was like, that feels really wrong. Like I'm really worried I've done something. If I can't train shoulders, like they're a muscle I really need to bring up. Like all these emotions get picked up, and then I don't know, days pass and you realize. Luckily for me, it wasn't anything anywhere near severe as what you've gone through there. But they're just good teachers. And I think the kind of point I was, I guess, trying to make there was like some of these tools that you picked up from kind of the other guys was that longevity aspect. I always like, you're one of the best, like at least from what I've seen, or in my opinion, one of the best bodybuilders out there from just a like holistic standpoint for sure for me, and someone I very much look up to. And you've been doing it for such a long period of time, and I think that's what's allowed you to be so successful, because like it is delayed gratification for like natural bodybuilding. It's such a slow burn, so you have to be just kind of like you say, depositing the pennies like each and every day, so you can just get better and better each day. And if you're doing things that are costing you in the short term, actually benefiting you in the short term, but they're going to be costing you down in the long term, like that, it's just not going to be sustainable, and you're going to have some kind of bad realizations down the line. Was your form and technique before you got introduced kind of Eric and he was taking you through some pieces? I imagine you already had quite good, because I think that's something you're very much known for, is like having pretty pristine technique in the gym.
It was good. Yeah, it was sort of pretty much solid. I mean, they're like, looking back in hindsight now, I look at some of the videos, I'm like, okay, I need to fix those things. But I mean, overall in general, never like haphazard or anything like that. Always pretty solid. And I remember the first training session I had with Eric, 'cause actually when I first started 3D Muscle Journey website, I went down to his gym to interview him and all that and put him on the website, just feature him, because it was before we were really, forming the coaching business. And, I remember him telling me like, yeah, I can tell you've been doing this a long time. Like him just kind of watching me train. So yeah, I've always been pretty technically sound. Even in high school, like my curls, like I look at like the one famous barbell curl photo I had with the mustache and all that. Like you can see like I don't know, it was over 100 pounds, I think it was. But I mean, back is perfectly upright, straight. I'm not leaning back at all. Elbows are tucked. And this is not anybody teaching me how to do form. I think it's just instinctually, I'm pretty good with those types of things. I've always been kind of an athletic kid. So I think just it kind of comes naturally, but I've definitely honed the skills in. And form is, if you think about it, it's more style than it is anything. Because I mean, obviously you can look at any bodybuilder out there that throwing some weights around. You're like, oh, that looks so terrible. But you look at their physique and like, they're jacked. So and the thing with form is like, I can look at your form and go, man, damn, Steve, that's pretty pristine, man. Everything's like straight. And I look at someone else and maybe it looks totally different. But if each rep is the same, it's standard and they're safe, then who am I to judge that and say, well, that's terrible form? Like if it's standard and they've been safe doing it for long periods of time, like they must be doing something right.
Yeah. I think that's well said. I think the safety aspect is like a huge one. Like if it's safe, like, and it's providing results, it's like, well, it might not be, perfect, or maybe it is for them. Like you don't even, like you said, you don't even know. They could be so kind of good at getting the mind muscle connection through that kind of movement and get just a great stimulus for it. And so it's nice. Yeah, I think it is something you hone over time. I certainly have evolved as a bodybuilder where I was more so focusing on like textbook form, and then you get better at just being like, oh, this is, like I need to divert myself a little bit away from what is maybe textbook form and like find my form in the gym and things like this. And I think that at least is actually something interesting. I think I'm sure you've seen it as well, Jeff, in the last few years, where it's like this birth of, new exercises and people who are very kind of technically focused on exercise execution and maybe biomechanics and that sort of knowledge, which I think there's, obviously huge value in that, because everything we do in the gym is like biomechanics, and that is movement of the human body and using loads. But I think something that also came out of that is, people were like, oh, I have to have this exercise or this machine. If I don't have access to it, I'm not optimal, all these sort of things. And I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but I think you've built your physique from very kind of like what people would call just like basics. You haven't had access to some of this like top end kit or what have you, and maybe some of this fancy stuff. You very much have, I don't know how long you even have spent training in gyms versus from home, because I've only known Jeff training from home. So I don't know how often, like when you had stints training in gyms versus at home. I'd be interested to hear about that.
Let's see. I started training in a commercial gym in the early 90s, all the way until 2004. So, and then prior to the early 90s, I was training out of the high school gym, which is obviously not a commercial gym. But at the time, it was pretty decent. So I've been around plenty of equipment. Obviously, we're more technologically advanced now, so there's far more superior equipment nowadays. But yeah, I always like to just kind of look at that stuff and think context. Like, okay, if I have to worry about biasing my elbow here, or there, does it make sense for someone like me who's been training for 35 years? Probably a little bit more than, let's say, someone who's in their first year, who's just trying to learn the fundamentals. And the way I kind of see it is, if you haven't mastered the 99% fundamentals and basics, and you're focused on that 1% that might optimize something, like, okay, so if you're spending so much time like focusing so much on minutia and you're lost in the weeds with the other stuff, like it doesn't make sense. It's kind of backwards. It's like, focus on the principles, focus on a good structure, make sure your movement patterns are standard. Like whether it's like, I look like Jeff or I look like Steve, whose form's like really flawless looking from perception on the outside. It's like, man, those guys look like awesome doing that. Or maybe it's looking like Ronnie Coleman, not lifting 800-pound Ronnie Coleman, but his curls are like really like swinging away for the trees. But if it's standard and it's safe, it's totally fine. So it's learning the basics and fundamentals first. And then as you get becoming more advanced, then you're kind of looking for these little things that might make a little bit of a difference to help improve you. And then the question then is like, how do you even know if it's actually, because it's like, yeah, I mean, you know this, you work with a lot of athletes, like it's so context dependent. And then you would have to actually take yourself for a good, I don't know, 6 months or whatever, and do things this way and have all your variables perfect. And then now you make the change to something else, that 1% thing that you're doing now. Now all those variables need to be exactly how they were in order to see a comparison, any type of differences there. And the reality is that my home life, my real world is not going to allow for those variables to be perfect like that. So how do you know? It's like, so what you do is you do it, you have faith in it. If it's safe, you go through it. Maybe you notice some differences, and maybe it is the reason why you made that progress. Maybe it's not, maybe it's maybe it's a combination of things. And going back to the aha moment when I talked about like actually like learning like Mincer and Yates and all that. And yeah, I made great progress. But the question is what if I would have kept the same training program I had prior to it, because I was doing a lot more volume? Would I have made just as much progress if I would have increased my calories, had maybe a little more rest days in there? And chances are I probably would have made just the same, if not maybe more progress. So a lot of times we see things online, people will say this 1%, or, hey, I'm doing this. This is the reason why this is happening. Maybe, like, because I always kind of question it. Like, I don't see what's behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So I'm only seeing what you're showing me and telling me. So even myself, like sometimes I could probably go back to some of my old posts and go, oh man, I probably should reward that.
Yeah, I think that's so well said in terms of, I always think about, because obviously part of the great thing is we're way more we have way more access to science and PubMed, and things are being produced, and we have like the Mass Research Review, for example, which is fantastic, and they deliver it really well. But I think some people could take that and it could take them on the wrong path. Like you said, it could take someone who's, I don't know, they're newly into this, they've only been training a few years, and they suddenly are taking like this one study, and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that thing because it said drop sets are better, or whatever it is. It's just like, they take it and they cherry pick it or something, and they are trying to apply that. And then it can take them, I always say, like, if you focus on something new, don't let it take you too far away from the basics of what have worked. Because if, like you said, if you lose any of that, which all of that works, like you are sacrificing something for something that you're unsure of, because we just don't know enough of whether or not that's going to gain you anything at all. So if it takes anything away from the basics, it's probably not worth the investment.
Well, it's like I mentioned earlier too, like the guys, like when I was competing back in the early 90s, like muscle development, I don't see a ton of like, oh, wow, like all of a sudden these guys are that much bigger now versus the early 90s or the early 2000s. So if you go back, like if you become a historian a little bit, I'm not the historian, but Eric was. And so when he was kind of showing like bodybuilders, pre-steroid era, and you look at their physiques, you're like, well, they're not that much smaller than we are now. Like it's relatively kind of the same size. Yeah, some of them, they don't have like 6% body fat, but you can see the muscle development there. And then you kind of look a little bit deeper and you're like, well, they didn't have commercial gyms. Look a little bit deeper, like they got these funky looking barbells and dumbbells that they're using. And I'm sure their diet, like they didn't know about nutrition like we know now, but yet they were still able to attain pretty good physiques. And so, you kind of have to look at that and go, okay, so is really this 1% thing that I'm trying to do, whether it's like to be like biasing exercises or manipulating diet or whatever, is it really like generating like these huge, vast improvements? So, and I don't know. I just don't know. But when I look at history and I look at all that, I'm like, okay, let me just make sure that my fundamentals are in order. I have good structure, and I think from a supply and demand perspective. So it's pretty like the big rocks, right? Like, okay, make sure I'm eating enough to support my training. If I'm trying to put muscle on, let's not be in a deficit. Let's not lose weight. Let's just make sure I'm either maintaining or gaining weight. Of course, there's a lot of context with that. Make sure I got enough protein coming in. make sure I'm getting plenty of recovery in there, because I think that's an equal part of the process that a lot of people are fearful of. Like, I'm not in the gym, I'm not growing. Well, no, you need to recover, so you can perform well. Try to minimize stress the best that you can. Make sure you try to get enough sleep, stay hydrated, and give it time.
Yeah, I think that's so well said, because it can, again, with social media, kind of bringing it back to that, it's so easy to get wrapped up in, I don't know, like, again, I don't spend time on TikTok, but I hear things like, I don't know, people are sharing all these like fancy exercises, these influencers, because they're unique or new or different, or like, I don't know what it could be. And it's like, well, like, yeah, showing someone how to do a good back squat maybe isn't like sexy anymore, because it's like, that's an old school exercise or something. Whereas like those things fundamentally did work really well in the past. And it's actually a really interesting, like you said, like Eric kind of showed there, is like people are fundamentally getting almost all the results we're getting now. And well, we've improved so much in many ways, but it's still not enough to have made such a substantial difference to where we were in the past. So I do find that that's really interesting.
I think the biggest changes I'm seeing is like over the years is like the big picture approach to things. I think that's where things can really change things. So it's like, okay, if I'm trying to put muscle on, okay, how long are you going to do that for? Have the big rocks in place, but are you going to give yourself enough time to actually make that happen? Or are you going to let your insecurities about getting a little too fluffy rob you of that environment that's conducive towards muscle? That's what I see a lot, is like, okay, I'm deviating from the big picture. I'm making those type of decisions that derails. The same thing with contest prep, right? It's like, I want to get shredded in 12 weeks. No, dude, you need 6 months to get the conditioning level that you're really after. So it's these big picture decision making is where I think we've seen like a lot of growth over the years, and how to approach these things. And that's why we're seeing like people that are getting like extremely conditioned for bodybuilding shows and maintaining a lot of muscle mass, is because the overall approach is better. It's not these, yes, the little details can help, but that big picture has to be there first before those little things will actually be doing anything.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you made a good point also, talking about like, what's the cost of, not like maybe the monetary cost, but the stress or the whatever it could be, the time spent on it that could have been spent on other things, whatever it could be, a supplement or whatever. Like, could you have spent more time relaxing or sleeping? And again, I don't know how many people you could talk to and be like, is your sleep as good as it really could be? Or could you improve that a little bit? I think a lot of people, and myself included, I'd probably say it could be like a little bit better than what it is. It's like, well,
they're too busy watching TikToks, dude. It's like 12 o'clock at night, and you're like, eyes are like halfway down. You keep scrolling that TikTok.
I need to find that new exercise, that silver bullet that's going to grow me some quads or something. That's what I need.
Yeah. So just to snowball that. So, okay, now I got to get up at 5 in the morning. I only got 5 hours sleep now. Now I got to go train first thing in the morning. Well, now my training sucks. I can't perform well. Well, now I'm even more tired now because I probably shouldn't have trained. And then it's just snowballs, right?
Yeah.
So you could think about, okay, how does that impact the next day, 2 days, the rest of the week? How does that snowball? And I think people, like, if you, like, I try to slow myself down, take a big step back, look through the bigger lens, the bigger picture, not the here and now, and not stress on, okay, if I don't go train, there goes my gains. Like, no, actually, you're probably derailing some of your gains because you're forcing yourself, or you're forcing your body to do something that's not really wanting to do. Yeah. So again, it comes back to the supply and demand perspective. Like, that was kind of an aha moment for me a few years back, is like, take a big step back and think about supply and demand. What phase are you in right now? If you're trying to put muscle on, the demand's outpacing your supply. Okay, you need to reverse that. If you're contest prepping, naturally the demand's going to be higher than the supply because you're trying to lose body fat. But if you're constantly in that state, or if that demand really gets way out in front, you're probably not going to be yielding a very good result at the end. And you're also probably not going to be a very nice person to be around.
Yeah.
So there's push and pull. Sometimes you got to pull back. So as you get more experience, you kind of learn how to do that, like how to push, how to pull back, when to do it, and all those types of things. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on all
No,
that.
I totally see that. And something also you mentioned was in terms of these smaller things that people might be focusing on, like Brett Freeman said it in the last podcast, and I think it's just a great way of visualizing it, is like when you're advanced, you've been doing this maybe a decade plus, and you've been doing it kind of quote unquote properly for that period of time, you've been getting the basics right. Like growing muscle as a natural is like watching paint dry. It's just like you don't know if it's happening, maybe you think it's happening, but like you can't, it's hard to assess very easily. And so like you said, when you do some of these like little nuanced things that maybe have some effect, it could be, I don't know, even Eric talked about some of these supplements that come out and they have like one good study, like Turkestone or whatever it's called, the new one that came out, and there's like positive, like kind of positive studies, but there could be some negative ones to follow. So you don't want to jump on things too fast because you don't even know what's going to happen there. But the point I'm trying to get towards is for you, as you were training for so long, I don't know how you look at it now, but how have you been kind of assessing progress? How do you like to look at for maybe your advanced clients, but also for yourself to assess whether or not you've been improving over time? Because obviously it is so slow. So yeah, how do you like to go about that?
I think it comes down first, like you got to look at the expectations and kind of where you're at. Like if you're relatively new to the game, like you're going to see some pretty fast progress. So it's easier to identify it. Like, oh shit, okay, my bench press just went up 20 pounds in the last month. Cool, I'm progressing, right? So it's easy to identify. Same thing with your physique. For 6 months, you're like, oh wow, I visually look bigger, a lot bigger, filling my clothes out, tape measure went up. But then over time, realistically, you have to change expectations. You have to realize that, it's not like you're going to see the same type of results. So you have to learn to kind of lower your expectations at that particular point in time. So again, it's like kind of changing perspectives. And what frustrates me, and I don't want to sound like I'm like negative or going on tangents here, but it's like when I see people that they like you mentioned early on about getting pro cards and all this stuff, it's like you're not even at that level yet. Like the way you're kind of looking at it is like you're trying to go from like peewee football to now all of a sudden in the NFL. So there's like layers to this, levels to it. So it's like, okay, first level, second level, and all the way up. And even when you do get the pro card, and I've seen this often too, is like here in the States, a lot of shows are just kind of watered down, there's like, okay, you win a pro card at a smaller show. It's awesome. Congratulations. You worked hard and you got your best physique or what have you. And you beat the people that were there. But, going from that to now the pro level where you have people like all over the world in one spot, like logistically, now you're just like, okay, I made a video on this quite a while ago. Like you're basically going into shark infested waters now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, and that was my first experience on the pro level, on my first pro world championships. I went there, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to stack up here. I'm doing my best, but I ended up getting 7th out of 11 in the middleweights. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of good bodybuilders here. So it helped me to kind of figure out what I needed to do to improve and try to work up to that standard. So I just think sometimes you just have to kind of just think of this as like you have to think of it as like just like any other sport. Like you start at the bottom, you got to work your way up. And sometimes you'll win a game when and this happens in other sports too, you win a game out of luck. Like, oh shit, you just threw a Hail Mary pass and it bounced off of 4 different players. And it just, the guy on the bottom just happened to be laying like this. And it lands on his chest and he wraps his arm around like touchdown. They won. That doesn't mean you're better than the other team per se. So you have to just change perspectives as your career kind of goes on. And that's something that I've kind of learned to do, like with progress. It's like, okay, I realize now year 35, 36, it's very unlikely I'm going to see new tissue. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. So that's the thing. It's like if I just have that mindset, like it is what it is. And if I start, let's say, training in that fashion, well, maybe I start to lose the muscle that I do have. And I think too, what we don't appreciate is the fact that the level of development that you're currently at, you've worked hard to get there. So whether you're Steve Hall level Jeff level, Alberto level, Doug Miller level, which there's no one else like Doug, so that's a bad example. But you know what I mean. It's like you need to appreciate the work that you've put in and the development that you currently have, and it takes effort to at very least maintain that. So to me, I get frustrated when people like they're just so focused on trying to make more and more and more and more, and then if they don't have that realistic expectation, then they feel defeated. When in reality is they're actually doing something pretty damn good. And then also too, if you look at other people and you're comparing your progress to someone else, it might be a very unfair comparison. You're doing yourself a disservice by doing that. It's like two artists, like here's your canvas, here's this canvas. They get their own paintbrushes, their own paint. Those pictures are probably not going to look identical. They're going to have their own beauty depending on how you look at it. So that's what I try to do. You know, I try not to look to my left or my right too much and just kind of okay, I mean, you're number 35. What can I realistically expect at this point? Possibly a little lean tissue. Let's push for it. But I could improve other things. I can improve my approach to the sport mindset. I can improve how I balance it out with family. You know, am I a better dad going through the process? Those types of things. Did I improve my form in the gym? You know, am I curling 100 pounds with that same strict form that I did at 16 years old? Am I doing 101 pounds? You know, those types of things. So there's tons of forms of progress out there, but oftentimes we just get really just blindsided to just tunnel vision to just one thing. And that is, am I bigger? And even sometimes, like if I have someone who's been training for, let's say 10, 15, 20 years, and they think they're kind of maxed out, then I'll find places where they've never been. Like, what's the highest body weight you've ever been to over your career? 200 pounds. Okay, let's go to 205. Let's see what happens. Get to 205, but stay there. Like train there, make sure all your variables, like all those big rocks I talked about earlier, just hang out there and do those things. Give it time, like give it ample time. Like is 6 months really enough time with your, like how long you've been in the gym enough to actually see what we want to see? Or is it, hey, let's do this for a year, or even 2 years and see what happens, you know? But I think a lot of times like we just get like, okay, you know, I did this for like, I got to 205, I'm there for a month or two. I'm like, okay, I don't see anything. So I'm just going to go back to what I always do.
Yeah.
So you have to get yourself out of comfort zones in order to really learn and really truly identify if something is actually beneficial or not. And that's where you learn more. Because even if it's unsuccessful, then you know, okay, I've crossed that off, cross that one off the list. So you just get wiser, more intelligent about yourself. So yeah, I get frustrated with some people that are just like very impatient.
Again, I think that's really well said, Jeff, because first of all, setting the kind of the foundation there in terms of what's realistic for you to expect. So like you said, that person who's been training a decade, 2 decades, are they going to be able to see anything over 6 months? Probably not, because it's like realistically, we know they probably haven't, they probably could say it themselves over the last 6 months. Can you realistically say you've changed, like, and you've grown or like whatever over those 6 months? You have to give it a bit more time. And that's where you kind of get that perspective as well of when we are looking at these 1% or this thing that's a bit different, whatever, the time to look at it is when you've been doing the basics for a heck of a long time and you've got those well in check, so you can try different things. And also to focus on yourself, because that's something in my last off season I did much better, was to focus on my own process and what's working for me rather than getting caught up in what everyone else was doing, which just helped so much. I can't even tell you, like, just for like stress levels, just helped build confidence in my process. So I love that you mentioned that. And I think you did one time, I don't know how long ago this was now, but you did try one experiment. And I think that was with going back to a little bit higher volumes. I think that would be interesting to hear kind of how you approach that and what you kind of concluded from that experiment.
This was, what year is this? 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. I think this was like maybe like when the volume was like starting to become real popular. So of course, at the time, a lot of my athletes were like, kind of asking me about it. And I'm like, I don't know. I have no clue because I've never gone through it. I know just as much as what you know because you're seeing the same information that I'm seeing. So I have to actually be one to actually dive in and see and experience it, see what it feels like and that type of thing. So I probably gave it a good 6 to 9 months made sure I was in a surplus. My protein is always like where it is, so it's always there. And I didn't notice any like physique changes really. What I did notice was I was more beat up, more tired, more fatigued, moody, joint aches. So to me, it just was like, okay, I'm beating myself up, but yet I'm not seeing regression. So that's a positive. But at the same time, I'm not enjoying it. I feel more beat up and just moody, achy. So it wasn't worth it to me to just stick with it and keep it going. So if I would have continued another 6 months to a year, would I have made more gains? Maybe, but would have been worth the way my quality of life was? No. So let me, tone the volume down, that type, and just kind of just go back to the principles and tools that I was using prior. But even then, though, Steve, like acutely, like there are times where I do use kind of that principle, like, okay, today, I might feel like mentally I just don't have it in me to push closer to failure. Okay, let me just do 4 or 5 sets here and just leave more reps in the reserve. I do things like that acutely. Yeah. I do that all the time. I auto-regulate my training all the time based on principles. And that's what the thing is, like with, it's a social media thing, right? So we have this shiny new tool here. I'm going to sell it. I'm going to market it, make it look like it's the next best thing. There might be some value there. Like, oh, I might be able to take maybe a principle that makes sense there and apply it. It doesn't have to mean I'm applying it like all the time, because that's a lot of times what people do is like, oh, I'm going to do this program and just they're perfect with it. Well, it's like maybe you take something a little from there, a little from there, a little from there, and eventually you like start creating your own. Yeah. And that's what I've learned to do. That's actually what I've learned when I used to work at the Toyota plant. It's like I learned to kind of take bits and pieces from their system and the people that worked within the system to make my flow, my process a lot better. So there's some, like, if you look hard enough, there's a lot of things outside of the bodybuilding realm that can really make you a better bodybuilder. Like for me, I don't look at like, I love Mike Israetel stuff. Like I watch and I've learned some things from him, and same thing with Eric Helms and all these other guys that are just very intelligent. That's not all I could guarantee you that I look more at other sports to learn more about my process than I do those guys. And that's not a knock against them because they're obviously like far more intelligent than I am. But like when I look at other sports, I'm like, okay, what are they doing over there? So I just kind of carry a lot of those principles over into my bodybuilding as well.
I think that speaks to your level of how long you've been doing this, your level of experience, because me and Pascal spoke about it the other day where we were in this, like in our stage in our career where I was like consuming podcasts all the time. That's all I'd listen to ever. Whereas now I find myself like I almost can't. Like I'm like almost like burnt out from it. And like once you understand the principles as well as you do, Jeff, and like you explained it perfectly there. Like if you're doing less sets that are close to, you're doing, you're not going as close to failure. You need then to potentially increase the volume to get the same kind of stimulus for growth, which a lot of the listeners will know about. But being able to auto-regulate and push and pull like that is so good. And also, I think something you've spoke about throughout this is kind of listening to your body and getting feedback in terms of how are things feeling. I think each other kind of sings to like what bodybuilding is. It's you going through it. You are your own experiment. So you kind of see what's working, what's not. If you're getting all this feedback that's like not positive, like you said, you're just feeling more beat up, you're feeling more tired, you're not really feeling like you're getting a stimulus that's outweighing that. It's like the cost versus benefit is just not there for you, especially if your kind of life stress was up. That's unlikely to be particularly productive. So I think that's a really good kind of discussion to a lot of people who are in maybe like my position or a little bit earlier or maybe a little bit later. And they're kind of, again, a lot of people look up to you, Jeff, I think, and myself included, to like, be like, what's Jeff doing? How's he got to where he is, being as successful as he is, and just learning those lessons. So I want to say a massive thank you for you being here and for this discussion. Actually, one question I wanted to ask, I won't forgive myself if I don't ask. I think people will be interested. Are you going to be stepping on stage with Alberto this season? Is that in the books? Is that a plan of yours, or how's that going?
So I know he's competing at I think it's the Universe on the East Coast of the US. I would like to do it, but just logistically, it's like flying across the country.
Right.
It's think finances and that type of thing. So I just don't know if that makes sense for me. There's a show on the West Coast in Washington. So obviously it's financially going to be easier on the wallet. He did mention that he might be doing that one, so that could be a possibility at that show. And then Worlds, I mean, depending on if he's probably going to be a class below me as far as weight. So I just don't know if we're going to have that opportunity. I'd love to, though. So maybe bug him on doing some type of NPC show or something like that, just to make it happen. But I'm going to predict this. If we do end up competing against each other, I think he's going to finally get my number.
How many times have you been up against each other before?
We competed in 2011 together. 2014 we competed, but we weren't in the same show, the classes. Okay. So, and every time, like, I competed against him 2 times in 2011, and yeah, I got his number. But I mean, we're 10 years. It's 10 years later. He's actually made some pretty solid improvements. So yeah, and I would, to be honest, I would be really happy to see that, because it just shows his growth. And he's done so much for the sport, not just like, hey, I'm shredded, I've made improvements. Like, I mean, just what he's done for people over the years. It's like, it's really cool to kind of see where he's at now.
For sure. Yeah, I think people would be very excited for that, myself included. Just I'm not like fussed about seeing you go head to head. It's more about the fact that you're both on stage together, 2 role models for the sport. I think a lot of people just appreciate seeing you up there together and just like smiling and having a go.
To show my grandkids the pictures, like, yeah, look, I competed. Yeah, that's, to me, it's like because I'm coming towards the tail end, right? Like when you're in your 20s, like, okay, I got a couple decades ahead of me still. Well, now it's like I know I'm more towards the tail end, so having the opportunity to just have that one last shot to be able to, get those pictures with him on stage, just to say, hey, I'm still doing Worlds, like that right there. So it's huge, like huge victories.
Yeah. And
no one's going to remember where we placed. Trust me. 5-10 years from now, no one's going to know or really care, to be honest.
No, for sure. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being on here. If people want to keep up with your prep, I know you're documenting it on Instagram. Following fairly closely on there. YouTube, you also doing some vlogs now and then on your YouTube too?
Every now and then I get some time. Yeah.
They're tough. Like, I know vlogging is just, it's Instagram, like a post, like that's dealable, but yeah, vlogging, you need to get like an in-house, you need to get your son on it, get him on the camera.
Right. Yeah.
Be your videographer.
Yeah. A little bit on the 30 Muscle Journey YouTube channel, and then Instagram. Yeah. 30MJ Godfather.
I'll make sure that's all linked below so people, if they're not already following, can follow. And again, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge, and I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.